I can introduce this program on Lucille Ball's return visit to this area in 1956. And I would like now to turn the mic over to somebody I'm sure that anyone who's been coming here knows very, very well, Greg Peterson from the Robert Jackson Center.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, and welcome. This is terrific. You're going to really enjoy this. And I'm so thrilled to see so many people with silver hair here. Let me tell you why. As I was leaving my office today, which has secretaries that are much younger than me, I walked out and he said, "Greg, what are you doing today?" I said, "I'm going to the Hall of Philosophy." "You're part of the Hall of Philosophy?" "Yes." "What are you doing, Greg?" "Well, I'm going to be the Ed McMahon for Chris Olsen." Total dumb look of what was I saying? Ed who? Ed McMahon. Ed McMahon. So the nice thing, most everybody, Ed McMahon, are we good there? That'll be my role today in introducing and being the interlocutor with Chris Olsen. Also, I am an attorney in Jamestown, New York. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Robert H. Jackson Center. And gotta have a little plug. The Heritage Lecture Series on July 24th, which was the following week from what John Schmitz was talking about, will include, I'll be back doing the same Ed McMahon thing with David Crane, who was the chief prosecutor of the Sierra Leone Tribunal. He's the one who indicted and started the legal process against Charles Taylor, the last sitting head to be convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity since Nuremberg trial, which of course was Robert Jackson. And then we have other events, and I would highly recommend that you go on the website and you're at Chautauqua on July 25th at 3:30. We have Judge Rosalie Silberman Abella, the Canadian Supreme Court Justice. Think Ruth Bader Ginsburg of Canada. She will be here as our annual Robert H. Jackson Lecture and lots of other things coming up. Thank you. Thank you. That's it. Again, wind it up. There you go. What did I learn today already? I'm there waiting to have Chris come, because Chris comes late. You know, he's got to wave to everybody, shake everybody's hand, because he's from Los Angeles. He's like Bob Hopper. He's got to meet everybody, and their family is here. This is spectacular. So I'm listening to the lecture, and you probably missed some of this. But I also see my wife walking in a few minutes ago. So what did I learn? One key factor, and that is during a Hindu wedding, the bride's groom for that one day is deemed divine. Now, guys, I'm not telling you, but I bet you missed that going into your wedding.
I sure did.
Because it never happened again, I'm telling you. So, Cindy, we got to redo this thing. I am so thrilled to have Chris Olsen here. Chris is a native of Jamestown, New York. Grew up, graduated from school here at Jamestown?
No, Jamestown.
Jamestown High School. And it's just a thrill. Then in 1982, he leaves the area, goes off to fame and fortune in Los Angeles. He's a hotshot lawyer, does tremendous amount of appeal processes, very successful, but he's never lost touch with his hometown here in Jamestown and in Chautauqua County, much of the story of which we'll hear on Chautauqua County and Lucille Ball. And kind of to get it started, I'm going to get out of the back of my seat. Over to my right, Chris, over here, and you can't see, but you're going to have to bear with me, is a picture of a very dapper-looking, tuxedoed Cuban kissing somebody very attractive. I understand she was about 21 years old. What's this picture all mean?
Well, that was the front page of the Jamestown Post-Journal, February 7th, 1956. I'm honored to have my family, my kids, and my sister here, and they could tell you as well, but that's the picture of our mother, their grandmother, Janice Swanson at the time. And for those of you that know the story, you've probably heard the lore, but it is true because I've now researched it. And because it was such a big deal for Lucille Ball to come back in 1956, they said they have to have someone to welcome her, welcoming committee. So they had an election to see who would be Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz's homecoming queen, and Mom won. There's 14,000 people that voted, more than voted for mayor the year before. And so we always say that that was, you know, she was kind of crowned even before Desi put the crown on her by the city. And for those of you that know my mother, there's several friends of the family here, very quiet, very humble girl, thrust into the limelight. If you look closely in the upper left, you can see my not yet father basically telling Desi to keep it short, I think, on the kiss. But that picture is what really kind of lit a fuse in me years ago, that there just had to be more. There couldn't just be a handful of pictures when the biggest star in Hollywood came back to her small town, which ultimately turned out to be the last time she ever returned to Western New York.
So, Chris, you talk about who you are. I mean, I gave a little bit of a bio, but you're a man of kind of a Renaissance guy, a movie producer, a sports enthusiast, a jack of all trades. Could you just give a little bio so at least your children will know what you're about?
Yeah, they're still trying to figure it out. But no, I'm a Chautauqua County guy. I was actually born in Los Angeles. My mom and dad, 2 years after that photo was taken, moved out to Redondo Beach, California to work in aerospace engineering. And my dad always said he had to follow the Brooklyn Dodgers out there because they had just moved out there. And despite his best efforts, I became a Yankee fan. But so my sister Cindy, my other sister Sharon, and I were all born in California. And then we moved to New York, back to my father and mother's hometown of Jamestown. My dad was a Jamestown High School graduate. My mom was a Panama graduate. And my sisters and I all graduated from Jamestown High School. And we love everything about this area. Growing up, we came to Chautauqua several times a season on special events. We all graduated from here in the old amphitheater. And now that we live in Los Angeles with my 4 children, Madison, Mackenzie, Ted, and Tyler, who are with us, and my beautiful wife, Tricia, we come back every summer. So we're Chautauqua people, we're Western New York people, and I've found that this area is probably the nicest in terms of everything. When we have a day like today, God's blessed us with this beautiful weather. I mean, this is a Chamber of Commerce day, Greg, as you know. And just every day, where else can you can go hear Lorraine Newman talk about the art of play this morning, and then you can hear this beautiful talk, which I did catch the very tail end of, on different cultures and celebrations of Hindu and yoga and all the different things. And then stay and listen to Lucille Ball before you probably go and do something on the quad. I mean, it's just a unique experience. And I'm sure you've all seen in the bookstore, Teddy Roosevelt said Chautauqua was the most American place in America. And I think that holds true for today. And I think really, if you look at the cover of the book, that's what resonated with Lucy. Lucy had people bow down to her across the world. But when she came back to this area, to people that know what it's all about, she was home. And that's thus the title, Lucy Comes Home. So back to your question, Greg, as 2 lawyers could sit up here all day. I hope you have no plans till like 9 o'clock. But no, this will be less than an hour, I promise you. But so after I graduated Jamestown High School, I went to undergraduate at Elon University down in North Carolina. Pepperdine Law School mailed me a poster, which was the campus overlooking the ocean. I said, that's where I'm going. And so I've been out there now since 1989, but I still call Jamestown and Chautauqua County home.
So to write the book, to set the stage for what it is, the book principally deals with 17 days of which she started in California and worked her way across the states. You had to learn a little bit about Lucille Ball. I know you know about the most famous person from Chautauqua County, Robert H. Jackson, but what did you learn about Lucille Ball?
That's right. Well, it's funny, Greg should say that, because in the research, and I was fortunate, I got to give the commencement address, which was the first speaker in the new amphitheater for Jamestown High School, and a colleague of Greg's that works at the Jackson Center. And if you have time this summer or next, plan on going to the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown, because it really kind of set the table for the world outreach that we're seeing across Chautauqua and Chautauqua Institution, where they're bringing in the best thinkers and the best creative people. And he's interviewed and has recordings with Ed, his partner in crime on the digital side back there, of every living person that was associated with the Nuremberg trials. And Robert H. Jackson, as I said, I went to law school. I grew up here my whole life. I didn't know about Robert H. Jackson till he started what he's doing. And I was driving back from Jamestown Airport, back when we used to have frequent flights on U.S. Air. and my sister and I were flying back, and we saw the statue of Jackson, which is now at Jackson Center, but at the time was in front of Love School. And I said to my stepfather, Bill President, I said, Bill, who is that? He said, well, that's Robert H. Jackson. He's the only person in U.S. history to be Attorney General, Solicitor General, and U.S. Supreme Court Justice, on top of being appointed as the chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials. And they have all his papers, they have his chairs, they have every piece of history associated with that critical time on the Nuremberg trials and most of Jackson's decisions. So when I was getting ready to give the speech at the commencement last year, one of Greg's colleagues shared with me a letter one of Justice Jackson's classmates sent him. And it was before he was to speak at Chautauqua. And so you can see how everything's intertwined and ties together. And the classmate said, Justice Jackson, congratulations on being Jamestown High School's most famous alumnus, ... It's a good thing Lucille Ball never got that far because she never graduated. But a lovely letter and a lovely sentiment. And so in doing that research, I learned, and you can imagine, all the things going on in Chautauqua County and Chautauqua Institution. And those of you who've been coming here for years, you know about Teddy Roosevelt speaking here. You know about 8 or 9 presidents and Thomas Edison marrying the daughter of the founder of Chautauqua. And you know Amelia Earhart flew her plane and landed it on the golf course. And you know that some of the best music was written here. And the best performers and the best artists and the best writers have all come here. And what a nice little Mecca we have. And it really ties in with the theme for the week, art of play. And I can think of no one that specialized in the art of play more than Lucille Ball. And so just on a couple random notes, I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, so I feel compelled to give a shout out to the people in the wings. Appreciate you being here way out there, as he always did. And then I couldn't be in the Hall of Philosophy, which ties to my history, Greg. My favorite class in college was philosophy. I was a philosophy minor. And John Sullivan at Elon College was my first class. I'm a freshman. I just left Jamestown, left Chautauqua County, went to North Carolina, was feeling a little homesick, and here comes this professor, and he looked like studio casting professor. And he comes out and he says, now freshmen, you got a long 4 years ahead of you. He goes, don't tomorrow away your lives. We all kind of looked at him, not really knowing, and he stood up in front of the class with no podium, and he said, tomorrow when we get the A, or tomorrow when I get the girlfriend, or when I'm starting quarterback, or when I speak at Hall of Philosophy, tomorrow, 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 you're dead. And he laughs by himself for like 3 minutes. And the whole class is like, I think a couple people dropped out right then, to be honest with you. But I've always loved that. And I think it's a good message for the week, for the art of play. As much as we all try to do things and succeed and be everything we want and all our dreams, don't tomorrow away our lives. But slow it down, as Lucy would tell us, and as my philosophy professor would tell us, enjoy the moment and enjoy the art of play.
Lucille Ball was born in 1911 here in Jamestown, not Celeron. She was born in Jamestown, not Celeron. Spent much of her life in Celeron, so they can lay claim also. And she said, I am not funny, but I am brave. Did you learn some of that in your research?
Very much so. And you think today, and I'm blessed with 2 daughters. My wife played college sports, and we just got back from Elon, where I took her to a tennis camp, and I'm really appreciative of how many opportunities there are professionally and athletically for women. But you think back, and those of you that grew up in that time, I have to imagine, because I wasn't born until '64, but I have to imagine in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, it was very difficult to break that glass ceiling in whatever your chosen field, be it teaching or be it acting or comedy. And so her quote, which is also in the book, I think really resonated, that she herself saw herself as brave. Here she comes from Chautauqua County. The first chance she could get, she'd go to New York City. Her mom, who had a difficult childhood and a difficult life, Lucy's father died when she was very young, I think 8 years old, and her mother was pregnant with her brother, Fred, who became her business manager. And for Lucy to succeed in a way that she did, with no connections, no family money, nobody's uncle she knew in Hollywood, really it took chutzpah and it took her being brave to succeed and go from our beloved small community to the biggest stage in the world.
She said also, I'd rather regret things I have done rather than things I haven't done. That's sort of that tomorrow concept. Can you elaborate on that, why you use that as a head of a chapter?
Well, I think, you know, and those that know us that are here, and I promised my wife I wouldn't cry because she gets mad at me, but on August 3rd, 1979, my father died playing church softball, and I was 14. Cindy was 15. And through that, I was blessed because he was such a wonderful man, but that ties in tomorrow, and it ties in with make the most of today, because you don't, tomorrow's never promised. And so, you know, we all struggle with that from time to time. But I think that would be the message. And that really, Lorraine Newman did a lovely job this morning because she was talking about play and how broad that is. Play could be different things to different people. And there was a lovely quote that the Historical Society had up, John, and thank you for having me here, by the way, but about Emerson. And it talked about Emerson talking about some people are really good at work, but to trifle, to enjoy the art of play itself is in itself an art. I couldn't do Emerson justice, but something to that effect. So I think, to your point, Greg, make the most of the moment. And I think, you know, Lucille Ball died in 1989, and I think she's a postcard or next to that quote or that definition in the dictionary. She would be a good one because she certainly did make the most of everything.
So trying to make the most of it, she, together with Desi and the cast, made a movie called Forever Darling. And in order, she's such an astute businesswoman, as we've learned from history, and she'd be the first to say, I'm not funny, but I'm a good business person, then came up with this concept. Talk about this 17-day concept. What was it?
Yeah, so they were really the masters of marketing, and those of you that know I Love Lucy know that they were very instrumental in technology that still exists in today's entertainment world. The first show to use the 3-camera system. She was the first person, the first female to own her own studio, which they then sold. And anyone that's here in entertainment knows the importance of owning your own material, your own content. Her and Desi did that and then sold it and then bought it back. And just so many cutting edge things. And, you know, really the 17 being the kings and queens of marketing, they really kind of invented product placement. So often a lead into the show would be by a major sponsor. And then within the show, they would have sponsors. And so, and my wife does product placement today, so we kind of chuckle at, you know, in 56, they were way ahead of the curve. But the 17-day concept was the studio system was still in existence. So if Lucille Ball is going to leave her home in Beverly Hills and go to Jamestown, New York, let's make it market worthy. And obviously some smart person at MGM said, let's make it promote our film, Forever Darling. So there's literally Hearst newsreel footage, and we're doing it as a documentary film, which hopefully next season we'll share with you all here and at the Jackson Center in Jamestown. But Hearst newsreel footage, for those of you that remember. And now Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz embark on their 17-day journey across the country to premiere their film, Forever Darling, and to benefit the Heart Fund. And there's a marching band, and there's celebrities, and I don't know if there's fireworks, I don't really remember, but in my mind's eye there is. And that's going to be the start of the documentary. And while most of the acclaim came when she reached her town, they also traveled to 9 cities. They went to Chicago, they went to New York City, they went to Philadelphia, they went to Dallas, and each place they premiered the film after they did in Jamestown. And just to tie it all together, you know, it was a big deal. Not everybody traveled as much as they do now. And so Look magazine and a lovely lady named Charlotte Brooks was embedded with them. So when they left the train station in Los Angeles, and it literally was trains, planes, and automobiles, she traveled with them. And we have her to thank. She's since passed, but over these 200 photos, most of which no one's ever seen, she took the most intimate photos of Lucy and Desi, and Lucy back in her hometown, Lucy going to her childhood home, and Greg and I will talk about some of the more specific stops. But that really kind of lit the media fuse. So each stop, they covered Lucy, and it really promoted the film Forever Darling in each city.
But the end game was to kind of do a premiere in her hometown. This was 1956. As it turned out, it happened to be her last time here.
That's exactly right.
As she finds her way to New York City, what were some of the activities that we're doing that were sort of build-up, that were the public relations build-up, that these folks especially would appreciate.
Oh my goodness. And he, I always told Greg, I said, you haven't really become known in Jamestown until Greg Peterson interviews you, and he did it at April 26th. I said, what happens now? This is the second time, so I feel he's got the best questions ever. But the setup was, so when they get to New York City, which is really kind of where Lucy made it, her call to Hollywood was from Samuel Goldwyn in 1933, wrote a letter and said he had 12 girls for the Siegfried Follies, and one fell out. And they said, Lucy, we need you, but you got to be in Hollywood by tomorrow. And she did, and ever since then, she never left. But so her and Desi come back to New York, and the day before she flies to Jamestown, New York, she's on Ed Sullivan and the Ames brothers, who sing the theme song, Forever Darling, and her and Desi, and they're doing like a serious rendition, and Lucy being Lucy, she's weaving in and out of the singers and performing, and Ed Sullivan's loving it, and then he closes the show. I don't think I'll do my really bad Ed Sullivan impersonation, but a really big shoe, no. But anyway, he says, and Lucy, good luck in your hometown of Jamestown tomorrow. So that was at like 3 p.m. on the Sunday before she got to Jamestown. That same day at CBS Studios, they went and they filmed a show called What's My Line? And raise your hand if you remember What's My Line, where you guess.
I love this crowd.
Exactly right. I knew Greg.
Our people.
Yeah, and so they have, Desi's one of the panelists. Lucy wasn't, but she was on stage left. And they have this really handsome, about the same age as Lucy, gentleman sitting there. And the host finally says, Desi, you better be nice to this guy, because this is Floyd Carlson. He's flying you and Lucy in a helicopter to Jamestown tomorrow. So as it turned out, and as only happens in Chautauqua County, Floyd Carlson was one of Lucille Ball's classmates. And there's a picture. I apologize, we don't have the bigger picture, but that's him. And so they get in Bell Aircraft, which if you know anything about this area in Bell Aircraft, they did much of the military aircraft, both helicopter and planes. Bell Aircraft lends them his personal helicopter. Lucy and Desi created another show called Whirlybirds, based largely on their experience with Bell Helicopter. But so they get in, and you couldn't do this today, obviously, but Lucy, as the legend goes, leans over to her classmate, Floyd, and goes, hey, Floyd, have you ever flown this over Niagara Falls? He goes, no. She goes, do you want to? He goes, yeah. So they flew over Niagara Falls. And being a February rainy day, Greg, they had to modify their flight plan. And he had very poor visibility, but what are you going to, you got 20,000 people waiting an hour and a half away. You're going to not make it? So Floyd brings the plane down after they went over Niagara Falls, and he follows the train tracks to Jamestown because he could see them no matter what the visibility was. And so kind of the epilogue to Greg's question, when they landed from the air, they saw the high school band at Jamestown on the football field had spelled out, Hi, Lucy and Desi. And there's footage of this, which will be part of the documentary. But so as they land, most people remember it as one helicopter, but it was actually 3 because MGM had their press corps, and a lot of Charlotte Brooks, the photographer, they landed first. So Lucy and Desi come in, and there's a great gentleman who's going to join us in New York City on Tuesday for a talk, and was at the Jackson Center, a guy named Tony Cosimano. And some of you may know him. He was a Jamestown High School graduate, married his wife Peggy. And he's a 15-year-old band player who'd been sick for a week. And he talks to his mother. He goes, the school was closed. There's pictures in here, gentlemen, blue-collar town, Monday at noon in the parade because they took off of work. Everybody shut down for this. So he convinces his mother, John, that he's got to go. All his friends are going. He's going to be one of the letters. So he goes, and he looks at this helicopter, 15 years old, and he tells it much better than I. But Tony Cosimano says, how is that staying up in the air? Because most people had never seen a helicopter live. So he says, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a helicopter pilot. And I see the gentleman with the veteran's hat, thank you for your service. Tony went on to go to West Point. He flew helicopters in Vietnam. He was in John F. Kennedy's inaugural parade. Woodstock, everyone remembers the Woodstock concert. He was hired to be security, and they thought they'd kind of keep the people with tickets out by just having the helicopter, but 500,000 people showed up, so he became transport for every artist you see on the stage. He'd pick them up a mile away, and they'd fly him to the stage, and he went on to start 2 aerospace companies. And so when I interviewed him for the documentary, Greg, in New York, there's you've heard the story, but a little conference room, nondescript, and he says, do you have 2 more minutes? And I said, yes. And he opens this door, and he's building a large $1 million helicopter for the president of Under Armour. And according to Tony, all of that was because he was a letter spelling, "Hi, Lucy and Desi." The trajectory of his whole life changed. And that's what you find in Chautauqua County, and that really defines Lucille Ball's legacy and what she meant to people.
So, Tony, I just want you to know what's going to happen next. Tony Cosimano is coming here. We're going to talk about Woodstock. We're going to talk about flying in. Think about that, Santana. Thinking about Crosby, Stills, Jimi Hendrix.
Joe Cocker.
Joe Cocker. Cry Me a River. My gosh. That's what we're going to do. So come back next year. That'll be next year.
Absolutely.
So you start this project. This is a love letter to your mom. What did she say about that as you were growing up? Obviously, you have some pictures, but did she talk about it?
Well, it's funny. So my wife and I just came in from Los Angeles. My kids were here earlier, and we had a few extra
By the way, can they stand up? So
yeah, please. Let's hear it for the kids for putting up with Dad. Huh, everybody?
Turn around, yeah. Because they're probably hearing Dad for the first time.
And on their behalf, I apologize for the gum. But anyway, so...
it's okay.
But anyway, so we came to the house here at Chautauqua, and they had Lucy books everywhere. So there's been an ongoing joke where if those of you that used to watch Oprah Winfrey would have her Christmas shows, and one particular show, she gave everyone a car. You get a car. So now everybody, I meet, my daughter teases me, Mackenzie, she's like, you get a book, you get a book. So anyway, but so what it meant to my mother was kind of interesting, and the reason I brought up they're all over the place is she was the opposite. This photo was tucked in a red photo album, and those of you that remembered What's My Line will remember the sticky, if you were lucky, you had the sticky ones. You used to have the four-corner ones, which were my dad's. But the sticky ones, you got to rip the page and you put it back. And after she was, you got to remember, no digital photos. So the Jamestown merchants actually helped bring Lucy to Jamestown, Bigelow's, everybody, Furniture Mart. And after, so I'm guessing it was a month after, she got all the photos, which were black and white photos, which are in, it was just sat on a bookshelf, of this picture and maybe a handful of others. And she didn't really talk about it much other than when we prompted her. And she was not a very public, loud person. My dad was, I am. But she was very reserved about it. And so when I started asking her about it, what I really took away, the most meaningful story to me, there's other pictures in here where after 20,000 people greet him, they embark on what, if you look at the book, it feels like a week or more, but it all happened in 48 hours. So people go to the ball, and there's 500 to 600 people in a room probably built for a few hundred, and they got separated. Everyone wants Lucy's attention and Desi's attention, so they'd stand on the tabletop. Desi, are you okay? Across the room, and he'd holler back, yes, Lucy, I'm fine. And my mother was seated next to Lucy, and it just touched her how much they cared about each other. In all that melee and all the hoopla and all the excitement, to stand and check on each other multiple times is really my mom's favorite story about that whole week.
Now, she seen the book.
Yes.
What was her reaction?
She got a little misty-eyed. Now, for those of you that are mothers, and my wife to my kids, she's been telling me for years, she always liked my writing, I should write a book. So she was ecstatic about that. More than law, more than producing, she's like, I got an author. So that was lovely. But she really loved it. And, what she felt is it really captured, and we have to thank Charlotte Brooks much more than myself, because the images tell the story. And Mom got to go to all the different venues that Lucy went to, including Lucy's home, which before she took Desi there, which was the only time she took him, Lucy leaned to my mom. She goes, we're going to the Cracker Box, because it was a little tiny house in Celeron, still there. The Rappaport family owns it and restored it to beautiful 1950s glory. And so they go, and there's a picture in there, which is one of my favorite pictures in the entire book, and it's of a simple foyer in a very, very modest home. And there's a staircase behind it. And Lucy, in 1956, current day, is doing a full Hollywood curtsy for Desi. And she says, this is the room where I used to dream. And her and Fred would come down the stairs as 8 and 12-year-olds, and they would perform for all the relatives. And there was a little curtain that separated the foyer from the staircase. And that's where her and Fred created the characters, saved up enough money to put on their first play. And it really, that many years later, was a touchstone for Lucy to come home. And what I love about the cover photo is here's this girl who's the world has opened up for her. And the helicopter's now landed. She's been on the ground probably 10 to 15 minutes, starting on the parade. And she's a little tentative. You can tell by the way. She doesn't know what the reception is. She knows everybody generally loves her and as a celebrity. But what do the people that knew her before she was a celebrity, what did they truly feel and think about her? And later in the book, you'll see by the time the second premiere comes, again, which is only 48 hours later, but Lucy is seated on the stage of the theater with her shoes off, talking amongst family and friends. And I just think that's a lovely transition because she knew the people that knew her cared about her for her, not her fame, not her fortune, but because she was from Chautauqua County. And before, when she had a very small gathering of people she was at the Scottish Rite and Little Theater with, she's like, now Tom, do you still play the saxophone? And Cindy, do you still have the two dogs? And Pat, you still love all kinds of music? And she just remembered little details about people she hadn't seen in a number of years. And one of the photos in there, Greg, is her with her 3 first boyfriends. And the only person in this little group of 60 to 80 people she didn't recognize was the first boy she ever kissed. And he was, I think by his own admission, I think he's deceased now, but he seemed like a jolly man. I didn't know him, never met him, but a little on the short side. He was balding already in 56, and Lucy just didn't recognize him. And Desi came up and made him feel welcome. He goes, so you're the guy I've been worried about all these years, huh? So that was kind of...
So she came here to talk about Forever Darling, the movie with she and Desi Arnaz and James Mason were in the movie itself. And she did a lot of publicity things. But at the same time, there was an event sponsored by the Temple Hesed Abraham, a Jewish men's organization in Jamestown, and she got to hang with such people as Mickey Walker, the boxing champion, Jackie Robinson, Ed Modzelewski, and a whole dais full of people. What was that all about?
Well, can you believe? So it's actually in several books, including Howard Cosell's book. And I went to him when I was 7, 8, 9. But if it was today's world, it would be LeBron James, Steph Curry, Jim Kelly, the top old and new athletes in the world. And the years I went, it was like Terry Bradshaw, Mercury Morris, Gene Tennis, Mickey Mantle. And so Cy Goldman, Howard Cosell in his book, said, look, there's this guy in Western New York. He almost guilts you into coming, but this guy has every program that it went. How many years was it, Greg? Like 30?
Almost 31.
31. That's going to be another book. But Howard Cosell says, this guy, Cy Goldman, almost guilts you into coming. And then once you come, he keeps you coming for years. And he talks about it. So Lucy comes in 56. And I can only imagine, having done some producing, Cy Goldman's elation that now, the same days that he's doing his normal sports banquet, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz in, I guarantee he didn't hesitate. He's like, well, they're speaking. Mind you that it was an all-men's event, and it was put on by the Jewish Temple. Lucille Ball was the first one to address the crowd. As the story goes, the meal, you couldn't have your meal because it was so packed, so they had to clear people into second and third rooms at Hotel Jamestown. And then for the speech, you'll see in some of the pictures, people are seated. Like here, there's room. We got a nice crowd, but there's room. There'd be people seated, standing, every nook and cranny to hear Lucy and Desi address the crowd. And then to Greg's point, on the same dais is Jackie Robinson. And in the 50s, he's talking about how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. And what an epic night for Jamestown. And one thing that may be mentioned in the book is this sports dinner was at Hotel Jamestown. Well, guess what's an hour later at Hotel Jamestown? The big ball. They couldn't get people out of there. No one wanted to leave. They had to empty the ballroom. It took 2 extra hours, so they canceled the dance. Or not canceled it, but they just wiped out the dance part and then went into a ball and a greeting of Lucy and Desi being welcomed and the crowning of Mom.
So Lucy, Desi have also, as they come into town, this is a personal story, they had a parade. And you'll see in the book, the parade, and the idea was to have Lucy and Desi on floats coming in, 1956, I'm 5 years old. My mother grabbed me by the nape of the neck and said, we're going down there. Well, it turned out it was very rainy. And Lucille Ball, being a star, of course, didn't want to be out there in the rain. So I never saw her. However, Desi Arnaz was right there on a fire truck, his drenched. But he stayed right there the whole time. Everybody got a chance to see him. He was that kind of guy and that kind of supporter of Lucille Ball being in his wife's native city. And then they had 2 events that evening. And how did that work? Were there just 2?
Well, you know, it's interesting, but before we move off of Desi, so Desi's father was mayor of Santiago, Cuba. And Desi was so blown away, and I have contemporaneous reporting from the papers, the Post-Journal, the Jamestown Sun, and others. I mean, it was national news as well. But Desi could not believe the reception not only Lucy got, but that the town gave him. And so he said to Lucy, he goes, I hope someday I'll be able to bring you to my hometown, but I can't imagine that they'll ever give you a reception like I got. And 2 of the favorite little anecdotes, Greg, to tell you about, you know, you think of some of today's celebrities, and I can guarantee they wouldn't do this, but to Greg's point, so he gets on the back of the fire truck, rides in the rain, waves to everybody. Later that same day, he goes to the little theater luncheon, and it's pouring rain, and a couple elderly ladies are coming in, and he stays and holds the door for them. And it just meant the world to them that here, you know, he was that conscientious of a person. And then another story, as they were landing the helicopter, and you can imagine all the people on the football field. They were going to start the parade, and some maybe 6, 7-year-old boy fell in all the hoopla. And Desi's doing like an interview, and he stops the interview, and he runs over and scoops the kid up and puts him on top of his car on the hood. And so Jamestown really fell in love with him. Chautauqua County really fell in love with him. And he appreciated everything. You know, there's a quote in the book where Lucy says that people tell you California's God's country, but God's country's right here. And in her book, which is a great book done years later off of audio tape she'd done, she talks so lovingly about Chautauqua County, especially Chautauqua Lake. So the Celeron piece is an important piece to her because the trains represented a way out and the lake represented a way. She was a big part of the Celeron amusement park where she'd go listen to plays and concerts every night for free in the Opera House and the dance hall, which then burnt to the ground. And she said her friend and her just sat on the banks of Chautauqua Lake crying. And she said, I think that's probably the most my friend ever cried, and I wish I could say the same about myself because she had other trials and tribulations to come, including her divorce with Desi.
Well, that 1956 trip and the coverage of it, and that which you've just talked about, Chris, had actually had a postscript with the fact that Lucille Ball died in 1989. She was scheduled to come back to Jamestown for the very first time since 1956 and was going to get an honorary degree at Jamestown Community College, but unfortunately passed away and didn't happen, which then led to her daughter, Lucille Arnaz, coming here, and there was going to be this creation of a Lucille Ball Center, and shortly thereafter, because of Lucille Arnaz's remembrance of all that Desi talked about Jamestown, they in fact changed the name and changed the dedication of that from the Lucille Ball Center to the Lucy Desi Center, because they wanted to make Jamestown a hometown which appreciated not only mom but dad as well. So much of that appreciation came from that 1956 visit and the hope to return. And just the postscript, the family brought Lucy Arnaz. She's buried in Jamestown. She was originally buried in California, and the family thought enough of this area to have that be a reality. So 2002, she was reinterred here in Lakeview Cemetery in Jamestown. So as you finish this book, you know, it comes off the galley, you've read it, so now, all of a sudden, for the very first time, this hardcover book with every photograph, and it's amazing, by the way. It's really, if you enjoy history, enjoy kind of dedication to a certain person, and certainly if Lucille Ball is part of your orbit, this is an amazing book. What did you think? I mean, you pick it up for the first time at some point, and your wife's watching you look at it. What are you saying to her?
There may or may not have been a good glass of Cabernet involved with that, but no, it meant a lot, and it really, it was just kind of the culmination of, you know, they did a, Marta Hallett, as again would only happen in Chautauqua County, I flew and met with the publisher. She had done the Titanic picture book. It's kind of her forte. And she said, now Jamestown, New York, her mother, she used to work at a store called Bigelow's, and she'd wrap Christmas gifts. And I said, Bigelow's? I said, that's where my mother and father met on Christmas Eve, and my grandma ran the yarn department. So we had this kind of kismet relationship, and but it was very lovely to see the first draft. But being a lawyer, my whole life's been deadlines. You know, law, you have this deadline, that deadline. But you can usually go see the judge and, you know, could we get another week or two, or call the opposing counsel, you know, John or Jill, I might need them traveling to New York, could we? Yeah, and it always works out. So the second final draft of publishing, and this is my first book, Marta and her publishing team, it was a Thursday. I'll never forget, I was in LA, she was in New York City. She goes, Chris, you know I love you. You know I love this book. But if I don't have the final by Monday, your book's not getting published for a year. So I said, now that's a deadline. So I finished it up right then, and she did a great job and was really excited with the finished product. So,
just as we going to kind of draw closure, this was a love letter to your mother. This was a love letter to Lucille Ball. It's a love letter to the community. How would you wrap up kind of what the walk away when everybody buys this book later today after you've autographed it? What is it you'd want them to walk away with?
Well, I guess we hit on it, you know, make the most of every moment, but really directly tied to the book, there's two things. And Greg had touched on Lucy coming back in '89, and after she'd had her first aneurysm, everyone thought she was getting better. There's a sign on the Hard Rock, which was the hot spot right across from Cedars, if you know Beverly Hills. Lucy's on the mend, or Lucy's getting better, and people are starting to come in, and her daughter and she says to Lucille Arnaz, as Lucy later told us when she came back, she said, my mom said, wouldn't you know it, honey? Right when I was getting ready to go back to Jamestown, because they were going to name the theater, as Greg said, and dedicate some things. And I already got she had her dressmakers working on her outfit, which she hand-selected, and Lucy, the daughter, goes, no, you'll be fine, honey. And that night, she had her second aneurysm and passed. But the real legacy of everything we did here, everything we did in the book, and what Greg said is here we are in 2018, this lovely day in Chautauqua, New York, and we're talking about Lucille Ball and her legacy. And we're not just talking about it, but we're living the art of play, and we're living her legacy of laughter. And if you haven't heard, you have to come. If you're in town, please come to the Lucy Desi Center and the dedication of the National Comedy Center on August 1st, which is just around the corner. August 3rd, and that entire weekend, they're dedicating a $50 million state-of-the-art, all because of Lucille Ball National Comedy Center. And what the board and Journey Gunderson and Tom Benson and a lot of other community leaders like Greg have put together to bring to the world, and the state of New York's behind it, national and international acclaim. They're getting the best comedians to really embrace it as their home, to celebrate not just the old parts, not just 1956 and 1936, but today, the best comedians. And that's what Lucille Ball wanted, was to celebrate, so the next girl from Celeron or Jamestown or Chautauqua or any small community in Western New York might not have to be quite as brave, because they'll have opportunity and they can learn to celebrate and hone their craft here in Jamestown, New York. And it really is stunning. I've had the benefit of seeing it a month ago, and I understand that's like light years away from where it is now. So it's an exciting time for Western New York. It's an exciting time to be part of the Chautauqua community. And I thank you all for being here today. I thank John for having us and Greg for hosting it. And in wrap-up, I was sitting with my coffee this morning, and so I wrote a poem for you all today. This is my original Art of Play poem. Provided my cell phone battery hasn't died, we'll read it. So we leave you with this. Trish, could you text that to me? No. The art of play. The art of play. Just here at Chautauqua or every day. The choice is yours, the choice is mine. To make it ours when we leave, we must resign. Emerson says it is a happy talent to know how to play, to know how to trifle. Let's make that our goal, to make it a life full. Full of laughter, full of play, not just on sunny, but on rainy days. To smile, to laugh, and make others so should be our bounty. No one ever did that better than everyone's favorite redhead from Chautauqua County. So thank you for coming. We appreciate you. Let's take the art of play with us today in all that we do. So go out and go play. That is the message to take with you today.
Oh, very nice.